Welcome to the Caritas Consciousness Project. I'm Gloria Quillu, and Caritas is dedicated to the evolution of consciousness, both individually and collectively. We promote this evolution by offering presentations, interviews, classes, and study groups, all on subjects relating to consciousness and also to healing, which we've been doing for the past 18 years. In 2019, we began recording our presentations, and all of our video recordings are viewable through our website, caritascenter.org. And we upload videos on our YouTube channel regularly, and that channel is called Caritas Consciousness Project. As a nonprofit, which we are, we rely on the support of our members and donors to keep our program going. And if you enjoy our presentations and classes in the service of the evolution of consciousness, I hope you'll consider becoming a member and take advantage of the members' discount. You can join on our website, which is, again, caritascenter.org. And now let me introduce tonight's speaker. Dr. Keith Witt is a licensed psychologist, teacher, and author who has lived and worked in Santa Barbara since 1973. He's conducted over 65,000 therapy sessions and published 8 books, including Loving Completely, Shadow Light, and Integral Mindfulness. His books, Waking Up and Sessions, were 2 of the first books on integrally informed psychotherapy. In presentations and classes around the U.S. and internationally, Keith has explored love, therapy, interpersonal relationships, and development from multiple perspectives, weaving neuroscience, integral theory, wisdom traditions, and numerous forms of psychotherapy into a coherent cosmology of love and healing. Keith and his wife, Becky, have been together for 48 years, and they have 2 grown children, Zoe and Ethan. Over the years, Keith's interests have included martial arts, tap dancing, surfing, tennis, and singing songwriting with his band, Blown Head and Casket. You can find out more about Dr. Keith on his website, drkeithwitt.com. And welcome, Keith, and thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Well, I'm happy to be here.
Good.
Good to see you.
I read your book, Loving Completely, which is this book here, and I found it really. It's kind of reflecting. Found it really great in terms of a direction. Directing us toward endless growth and richness and expansion and complexity, of course, in our relationships. And so I'm going to be focusing mostly on that book because that's the one I read. I was hoping to have time to read your book on shadow. One of the things I teach is dream work, and we do a lot of shadow work with that in that class, because of course our dreams are always showing us our shadow, and I'm not sure. Different people have different interpretations of shadow, so we'll get into that. I want to hear more about what your approach to shadow is, but first, how did you come to choose this topic of relationship to be your life's work? How did that happen?
I started studying seriously, studying psychotherapy and doing therapy in the 70s. And I happened to be directing a training program for paraprofessionals then, and then for some professionals. And it became quickly apparent to me that everything that everybody was concerned about was relationships. Relationships with other people, relationships with all the different parts of themselves, relationships with spirit, relationships with nature, relationships with their past, present, and future. In my studies of development, which was in its infancy, developmental psychology in a way in the 70s, it was clear that human beings, we grow in relationship from the very beginning. And so all the change work, all the helping work, all the developmental work is helping us improve those relationships. And even more significantly, they all affect each other. So my relationships with the different parts of myself affect my relationship with you. And problems in my relationship with different parts of myself will eventually translate into problems with my intimate relationships. And also, another complicated variable is the more intimate you become, the more your defenses are more likely to emerge in those relationships as your unconscious relates to a relationship as recapitulating the levels of intimacy that you had in your family of origin. So there's this vast level of complexity. And in the last 50 years, there's been an incredible amount of data generated about what constitutes healthier or unhealthier relationships in all these areas. That if you take any one of the areas that I just mentioned, some series of people, not just one people, but lots of people have done research about what's a healthier and unhealthier relationship with spirit. What's an unhealthier and unhealthier relationship in your love affair with your partner? What's a healthier and unhealthier form of parenting? What's a healthier and unhealthier way of dealing with your parents? So that's great. I'm an enthusiast, obviously, and a student of all that stuff. How do we make that accessible? Our unconscious gathers up this stuff, and then it translates into impulses and ideas and so on coming up from our unconscious self, what I call our shadow self. But how do we organize it? That's one of the things that attracted me to integral psychology in the first place. That Ken Wilber originally said, what's the fewest number of perspectives that gives me the largest and most complete picture of the present moment? And so I wanted to, as I was developing my work and working with people, in any given moment, what's the smallest number of perspectives that help us orient to whatever we want to orient to? And in this case, loving. In this case, our most intimate relationships. Most of Loving Completely is about the pair bond relationship. But there's a lot in it about parenting. There's a lot in it about our relationships with the different parts of ourselves. There's a lot in it with our relationship with the infinite, with spirit, with the void, however you want to call it. And so the way that, how do you access that? And what I finally decided is that we tend to access our own inner wisdom by asking ourselves questions. For instance, if you're listening to this and you ask yourself, what's the most loving moment that I've had in the last 48 hours? There'll be an answer that'll come out. That's the most loving moment that I had. The unconscious will always answer. A great question that I encourage people to ask is, what does my wise self think about this, about anything? And there'll be some kind of response. So how do we apply that to relationships? Well, there's 5 questions that we can ask ourselves about other people that will help orient us around how we will relate with those people. And those 5 questions also help us orient around, what am I bringing to the table in a relationship? So these are questions you can ask about other people and about yourself. You can ask these questions when you're first meeting somebody. You can ask these questions when you go out to dinner after living together for 50 years.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to just list those 5 questions.
I will. The first one, is there a spark of erotic polarity between me and this other person? The way that eroticism works is that the masculine of one person will spark with the feminine of the other. And I'm talking about masculine and feminine as energies, the way David Data talks about them and others. If you're going to have a pair bond relationship, that's a friendship and a love affair. And that love affair is organized around that spark of erotic polarity. And so if you're, when I originally was first talking about these, I was talking about them with my daughter. And she says, well, what do I look for in a boyfriend? She was like 16 at the time. This is a long time ago. I said, well, is there a spark of polarity? Is there that spark of attraction? And if the answer is yes, that's a good thing. Now, if the answer is no, it doesn't necessarily mean I don't want to have anything to do with this person, but it's something to be aware of. And none of these questions are, I'm gonna cross this person out because the answer might be no. If the answer might be no, then that's worth a conversation. And you generally in intimacy, what you find is if you have a conversation about a dimension, you either come out of that conversation closer and more trusting, or less trusting and less close. And that's very revealing. So the first one, is there a spark of erotic polarity between me and this other person? The second question is, does this person maintain their psychological and physical health? Doesn't mean that they're buff all the time, work out, or if they're enlightened. It just means, do they feel a sense of physical and psychological harmony? And if they're out of harmony, do they do something about it? Receive influence to get back into harmony? So that's the second star, the second question. The third star, the third question is, if I was in a relationship with this person, we were in conflict, would they be able and willing to do what it takes to get back to love? So able is having the necessary self-regulation skills, necessary understanding, the necessary resolve to deal with the distress of conflict to get back to love. And willing is, are you willing to do that? It's a lot of work. Able and willing to do what it takes to get back to love through conflict. The fourth star is, would this person show up appropriately for a child or a family member? And it's appropriate because showing up codependently doesn't help anything. Codependent help, as we all know, makes things worse. But showing up appropriately is significant. And when I told this to my daughter, she said, look, I just want somebody to date. I don't want to have any kids. And I said, you know, Zoe, if somebody wouldn't show up appropriately for a child or a family member, they probably wouldn't show up for you appropriately in certain critical situations. And the fifth star is, does this person have something that's sacred to them, larger than themselves? And do they feel a sense of appreciation and admiration for what's sacred to me? We all have an instinct for self-transcendence. Robert Cloninger wrote a book called Feeling Good, which was that title was the simplest thing about that book. He's a personality researcher. And he identified 7 temperamental characteristics that he could find in everyone that he had tested. 6 of those were easily explained from an evolutionary standpoint. Cooperation, for instance, persistence, harm avoidance, reward dependence, those kinds of things. But one of them was self-transcendence. That's the evolutionary impulse that came into being with the Big Bang and is continuing now through us consciously. This is why I'm delighted with your work. And when people say, what do you do? I go, I support the evolution of consciousness. That's my mission. And as a human being, I'm supporting it through a relationship because we're relational beings. We're the most relational beings that there are, I think, particularly with mammals. So you ask those questions and the answer is yes or no. We get an enormous amount of information from people when we first meet them. And so the answers, we'll have answers to those questions. Now, those answers can change. People who've done research on the big 6 personality characteristics found that people were pretty good after meeting someone for a short period of time, seeing how conscientious they were and how extroverted they were. They needed to know somebody a lot better to know how honest and humble they were. They needed to know somebody a lot more to find out their level of emotional reactivity. But we get a lot of information immediately. Our unconscious processes that. And if you ask those questions, those are great questions to ask, and they orient you to someone that you're with. And many of my clients have been on their second or third date, sitting around a table with somebody, talking about these 5 stars. Now, if you start with any one of those, it leads into an infinite expansion in those particular areas. There's an incredible amount of knowledge we have about how people are wired sexually and how they bond sexually over a lifetime. We have drives and instincts that go back to the very beginning of time, and these have been included and transcended throughout the evolutionary record and history into us, and they're all acting all the time. And so there's an awful lot that are acting around eroticism. Similarly, we have a lot of instincts and opinions and biases around health, psychological, physical health, and about conflict. Most of the human brain is designed to help relate with other humans. The biggest threat to humans the last million years haven't been the elements or other animals, it's been people. And so we've developed these capacities for relationship and resolving conflict. We have many instincts associated with that. Stephen Porges has popularized an awful lot on the physiological aspects of that in polyvagal theory. And showing up appropriately for family members and for children. There's certain moments in life where we need to put ourselves second and somebody else first. It's just important to know how to do that. And it's most obvious with children. Because why? We're all responsible. All of us adults are responsible for all the children.
Yes.
And so that's an important question.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the last question is, if we're going to hang out with somebody, or if we're going to grow with someone, we need to feel like our spirituality is complementary and coherent with theirs. It doesn't have to be the same. My wife and I have different spiritual orientations, but our orientations are complementary, and we're both very appreciative and even admiring. Hi, Kara. Kara. I have that problem with Tara and Tara too. So those are the 5 stars. Those are those 5 questions.
Those are really great. Really great questions, and they cover. And as I read through the book, I realized, just the way you develop them, and it's so clear. You have, kind of like baby steps for each one, and how to develop, it to work for the relationship and make it keep getting better and growing. And you ask the question, how can we optimize social engagement and stay away from destructive conflicts? And your answer is attunement. And you include several exercises to test a person's level of attunement in a given situation. How would you define attunement, and talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Attunement is being aware with acceptance and caring intent of what we're personally sensing, feeling, thinking, judging, and wanting, and sending our intent to another person to be aware with acceptance and caring intent what they're sensing, feeling, thinking, judging, and wanting. And as we set our intent to being aware of those dimensions with acceptance and caring intent, we're activating our social engagement systems, of which we have many. There's mirror neuron systems in us of motor neurons that recapitulate other people's states of consciousness, including their intentionality. There's empathy systems that we have that are activated when we're not feeling threatened, as well as self-awareness systems. And so that's attunement, focusing with acceptance and caring intent on sensation, emotion, thought, judgment, and desire. My book, The Attuned Family, was the subtext of The Attuned Family was how to be a great parent to your kids and a great lover to your spouse. Mm-hmm. And the reason that I wrote that book is first of all, I had small children at the time. And second of all, I'd had numerous experiences with couples that in their frantic efforts to be the best parents in the world had lost each other as friends and lovers. There was one study that was done in LA that said that dual income families where both parents were working spent an average of 17 minutes a week talking about something other than logistics. Okay, that's a disaster. And that's one of the reasons 50% of marriages end in divorce. Mm-hmm. And so attunement is if you connect, if you tune to yourself and attune to your partner on a regular basis, that keeps that friendship that you have alive. And it makes it easier to keep that love affair alive. Mm-hmm. And that friendship and that love affair and an ability to resolve issues, those are the three foundations of a pair bond, of the intimate relationship. Mm-hmm. And they're very powerful. You know, if you're solid as a friend, solid as a lover, and solid in your capacity to resolve problems when they come up, that relationship is a robust relationship and resilient. But they're also very fragile. If one of those slips for a relatively short period of time, people start to suffer and develop defensive reactions to that. And that causes problems. The work of John Gottman is the most revealing around this with couples. The couples that cherish each other and are grateful for what they have do well. Couples that make negative comparisons and nourish resentments, they start a slow cascade of events that lead to betrayal and separation. Mm-hmm. And since there's a lot of challenges in life, we'll all have those moments of nurturing resentments and making negative comparisons. And it's useful to know we don't want to live there. We want to shift over into being grateful for what we have and cherishing each other. And attunement is the basic skill set that we need to do that. Because, you have to have the connection to address the connection, to improve the connection, to see problems in the connection. And that attunement with acceptance and caring intent, that's the foundation. When I wrote Integral Mindfulness, that was the core practice. Once you establish that, then you can use the integral epistemology to know what to do next, because there's a bazillion things we got to do all the time. Mm-hmm. Start with attunement.
Right. And in order to even have the attunement, that question of in conflict, would this person be able and willing to do what is right, or what it takes, to get back to love, has to precede that. Because if they don't have that, or if you don't have that, or I don't have that, then I'm not going to be interested in attunement. So I think, that's, and part of that, or another way of saying that is, does this person have a growth mindset or a fixed mindset, right? You've mentioned in the book, and about what if you could talk about the difference between those two and about what they imply regarding our ability to learn and evolve. Can a fixed mindset person learn to become a growth mindset person is another question that I'd like to ask.
Sure. All of us are born. So I kind of need to start I'll work my way into it. Mm-hmm. So let's just start with that definition. A growth mindset person is someone that believes that capacity and intelligence is learnable. That I can get more capable and more intelligent in a particular area if I just focus on effort and progress. And The research is overwhelming. Yeah. Make effort and progress to get better in an area as long as you're receiving influence from other people. Receive influence, make effort and progress, you'll get better in an area, whatever that area is. You want to learn how to play the violin? Receive influence, effort and progress. You want to get better at loving your wife or your husband? Receive influence, effort and progress. So that's a growth mindset. And it's a superior mindset. I mean, that's all there is to it. It delivers better relationships, more success at work, more risk-taking, faster development, on and on and on. A fixed mindset is, if I do something, I have to do it well. And if I am not doing it well, I'm going to stop. I need to be the best. I need to be good. And if I'm not, that's reflects on my worth as a quality as a person. And then I have to hide that. Influence is threatening. Why? Because influence might tell me some area where I'm imperfect, and I can't take that. Unfortunately, during the self-esteem craze, Marilyn Grosspool was the instigator of this well-meaning woman based in Santa Barbara, as it turns out, though she spread all over the stuff all over the state. Let's give kids high self-esteem. One of the ways they did is they told them they were great all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that basically gave the kids the message, if you're not great, that's not okay. And so that created a lot of problems, supported a lot of narcissism. Self-esteem is useful, but that's not how you get self-esteem, by people telling you you're the greatest. You get self-esteem by focusing on growing as a person and identifying yourself as somebody that is a growing person. Okay? Now, we're born with different personality capacities. And one of them is honesty and humility. It's a normal distribution. Half the people have less than average honesty, humility by temperament, and half the people have more honesty and humility by temperament. Similarly, we're born with openness to new experience. It's normal distribution. Half people are born with less than average openness to experience, which lends itself to growth mindsets. Half of us are born with more than average openness to experience, which leads us to encourages growth mindsets. Similarly, with conscientiousness and extroversion. Similarly, with emotional reactivity. Some people, it's way more difficult to regulate their emotions. Some people, it's way easier. Now, anybody, because human beings have this superpower, okay? We have this incredible superpower that a focused intent and action in service of principle and driven by resolve can create miracles. Every human in this planet has that superpower. You know, Buddha knew it 25, 35, whatever. Back in 2500 in the Axel period, when he said right resolve, right view, right effort. What is he talking about? He was talking about this superpower. Mm-hmm. Focused intent and action in service in principle and driven by resolve, superpower. Mm-hmm. So we can get better at everything. Now, when I'm working with a couple with children, I like it when I get to work with them when the kids are really tiny, mm-hmm. because we can talk about how to develop emotional coaching parenting, how to develop authoritative parenting as opposed to permissive or authoritarian parenting, and how to encourage growth mindsets versus fixed mindsets. The sooner you start, the better. And of course, with children, the best way to teach your kids how to do stuff like this is to do it yourself. And the best way to teach your kids how to have great relationships is to have a great relationship with your partner. And that means
I think kids are naturally curious and naturally open, most kids.
They sure are.
Sometimes it's just allowing them to be that, right? Encouraging that.
Oh, yeah. You know, you can tell about when language comes on board, you know, right after the second year, developmentally, the left hemisphere is taken off. The right hemisphere is dominant the first year, okay? and then it kind of shifts over into the left. When that happens, kids start going, why? They start asking a lot of questions when language comes on board. And we do our best, ideally, to give them honest answers. One frustration that I have with parenting in the United States is that there's a standard of not answering certain questions that children ask. That was not my style of parenting with my kids, and I don't encourage that. I encourage always answer a question, but answer it in language and in a construct that's consistent with the developmental level of your child. If your child is at a magical level of development, don't try to give them some scientific analysis. Give them an explanation that fits with their magic worldview, but that later on, when they become rational, they'll go back and they'll go, well, yeah, that still makes sense. And that's a good way to understand the progressive levels of awakening that children go through. That's why I never told my kids that there was real Santa Claus.
I was just thinking of that example. You see,
No way.
Yeah. So what did you tell them?
What did I tell them? Well, we're not really a Christian, but it doesn't really matter about Christmas. I told them that there was this guy, Jesus, that came up with this thing that was radical, was everybody should love everybody else like they're a family member. Mm-hmm. And that was new. Nobody else had been saying that as far as we can tell before that. And it got very popular. Then later on, there was a whole lot of things having to do with the sun god and so on, which meant around the winter solstice, people wanted to give each other gifts and celebrate. And there was this mythological creature, Santa Claus, and then there was all these stories associated with it. That's the deal. Mm-hmm. So, basically it tuned out when, when I finished talking, there's this guy. But what they remembered, but the rest of it, some of it went somewhere, I guess. And they knew, okay, Christmas, I get a present and I want to give people stuff. I want to not just get stuff, I want to give stuff. Okay? Mm-hmm. It's about giving and receiving. And it's a time of year where people focus on that. They seem to remember better that thing about everybody love everybody. Mm-hmm. And I wish everybody felt that every day. Mm-hmm. So that's how I told them.
Yeah.
Just the same way about sex. I mean, when my son asked about sex when he was 3, because my wife was pregnant with Zoe. And, so she started to explain and he got bored after about 20 seconds. But the thing is that the conversation was normalized and it was one of thousands of conversations. Mm-hmm. It continues to this day. He's 36. Mm-hmm. So that's what you do with the kids, in my opinion. Okay. Now to do that, this is all easier than it sounds, which by the way, one of my first blogs when I started blogs a bazillion years ago was, I'm sorry I'm making this sound so easy. Because none of this is easy, really. Yeah. We have way too much complexity, conflicting drives, conditioning, defensive programming. But, it's you need to be able to have a growth mindset to teach a growth mindset. You need to be aware of your own defenses and blind spots and your own times when you fall, when you lose your attunement, to be able to teach attunement. Mm-hmm. And it's very difficult to develop those progressive levels of awareness. And we never stop. I'll never stop discovering blind spots. And that's kind of a beautiful thing, because as we know, from an evolutionary perspective, there's always another level beyond where we are. Mm-hmm. No matter what our level of identification or consciousness is, or connectedness with spirit, or of deep love, there's always another level of that beyond that we can aspire to, and with a growth mindset, grow towards. And that's a beautiful thing. Right. That's very difficult for a lot of Westerners, particularly Americans, who want to get good at something. I want to get enlightened. Okay, well, I don't know, maybe this was 10 years ago. My wife does flower essences. She does energy medicine. So I said, I want you to give me an enlightenment essence. Maybe it's 2 years ago. And she said, okay. So she did all the things, gave me this little enlightenment essence. And I did that and added it to my practices. And I began to have more moments of unity. I mean, it really did focus. But interestingly for me, after about 6 or 8 months, I stopped being interested in it at all. You know, I went, okay, I know when I have these moments where I'm functionally enlightened, and then I have moments where I'm not. And I was way more interested in identifying the moments that I was and the moments that I wasn't, and how to make the adjustments that were necessary when I wasn't. And kind of got disinterested in enlightenment as anything other than a descriptor of certain states. So some part of me had gone to another level of that understanding. And I know there's other levels beyond. I've had little peak experiences in many of them. And I look forward to spending more time in those states of consciousness if I continue to grow.
Yeah, the difference between a state and a stage, right?
Yeah. We could. You mentioned spiral dynamics earlier, which was the precursor in a way of, not a precursor. It's a complementary discipline with integral.
Yeah.
Ken loved it a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, there's the whole thing about Ken changing the colors and everything.
Why did he do that?
Well, he said he did it because it was fitting more with, the way that the color spectrum progressed. I personally think he did it more because he just loved the idea of stages so much and using colors as a construct so that we didn't have more qualitative things. Like conformity, rationality, pluralism, integral, egocentrism, power god, tribal, all these have other connotations, but they're all talking about the same value means. The beige level, the infrared level, where we're basically animal. There's these stages that people go through. You can divide them up into integral and spiral dynamics divides them into 7 stages. It could be 10, it can be 15. It just depends. Suzanne Kugruder once told me that she had as heavily researched stage development, that there was a stage between conformist and rational where people believed that they were willing to receive influence and change their minds, but they really had confirmation bias and resisted it. That most of the people, she said, that came to use her services were at that stage. She called it the 3.5 stage. She used numbers.
I see. Yeah.
So I think, Ken wanted to have his colors for it.
Yeah.
That's just now. I don't know. I'm sure he would give a different explanation than that.
Right.
You'd have to ask him.
Okay. Okay. Another area in chapter 11 in the book, you mention, I'm going to quote, in hunter-gatherer groups, it wasn't adaptive to stay romantically obsessed with a lover for a lifetime. Those who did risked missing other important contributions to tribe and family. Would you explain that? Because I was intrigued by that statement, and I wasn't sure exactly what was it that they risked missing, the other important contributions.
Well, we're a pair bond species that evolved in tribes. Okay? So the pair bond starts with attraction in romantic and distracting attraction, romantic infatuation. And when you fall in love, romantic infatuation, there are 11 hormonal systems at least that are focused on, it's all about you. It's all about the partner. Other things really fade. You are obsessed. You want to have sex all the time. You want to reveal yourself to this person. You want them to reveal themselves to you. The rest of the tribe disappears and you're kind of lost in each other. Okay. Well, if a tribe is just 2 people lost, a series of groups of 2 lost in each other, there's a lot of other things that don't get the same kind of attention. For instance, parenting. It's no coincidence at all that romantic infatuation lasts between, say, 6 months and 2 years. And it tends to produce a child who really needs you to pay a lot of attention to him or her, for the first year of their life, and then an awful lot of attention during the practicing period for the second and third year of their life. It's hard to do that if you're crazy in love with another person. It's an altered state. Dopamine, testosterone are just pumping through. Serotonin goes down. So, which is the same way it does in OCD. So you essentially have OCD about another person. And so a harmonious tribe can tolerate people, different couples having that. But if everybody was in it all the time, they couldn't compete with other tribes. And maybe there were tribes that had that all the times, but they couldn't compete with the other tribes. And, you know, that tribal competition had a big impact on our individual genomes. There's some evidence that between 50 and 70,000 years ago, that there was a heavy proliferation of tribes in Africa where the tribes began to rub up against each other. And a lot of people think that human beings self-domesticated somewhat during that time because people that had good collaboration skills and good social skills and good political skills would give their tribe an advantage over other tribes that were perhaps more aggressive or more shut down. And so the human genome got a big boost towards self-awareness, collaboration, and mutuality during that particular time. Some evolutionary psychologists and biologists speculate.
I see. And they were.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And those tribes in Africa that you refer to, they were hunter-gatherers?
Yeah. That's our history mostly is hunter-gatherers. We were hunter-gatherers until about 10 or 12,000 years ago, when certain forms of horticulture began to get practiced. And so now that's not exactly, some people think that it was 40 or 50,000 years ago that certain horticulture started, because we have evidence of some civilizations building huge projects 20 and 30,000 years ago. So there must have been agriculture happening in some parts of the world to sustain projects of that magnitude. You can't move a 100-ton boulder with a culture that's a hunter-gatherer culture.
Right.
You know, you gotta have agriculture to support, or at least herding to support the infrastructure that's required to move that. And in a city called Baal in the Mideast, 100-ton boulders were moved 20,000 years ago. To this day, we don't know how they did it, but you know, people did it.
Yeah. Huh. Interesting. I've noticed, now this is something you just touched on in the book, but it caught my attention because the idea of, there seems to be a trend among young people these days toward polyamory.
Oh, yeah.
And have you seen much of this in your practice? And what do you think of its potential for long-term relational fulfillment?
Oh, well, 1 in 5 people in one study said that they believed in non-exclusive relationships. That's pretty amazing.
That is.
That's 20%. I certainly tried to be polyamorous in my youth. I basically discovered I was monogamous 1981, 1982, and kind of informed my friends. You know, sorry, I'm a monogamous person. I think that there's a convergence of developmental strands in the polyamory movement, and I'll explain what I mean by that. We now live in a society that tolerates individual differences and allows individual expression and development on a large level, more than any other set of cultures in human history. It's amazing, comparatively speaking, how little pressure there is on individuals to have to conform in significant areas, sexual areas, social areas, that kind of stuff. Now, there's chaos associated with that, obviously. So what I've noticed is with an awful lot of people, they need to grow through a polyamorous stage.
Mm-hmm.
And once they start becoming sexually active and feel sexually competent, they go through a stage of one form or another of polyamory. They'll date different people. And there's lots of better and worse ways of doing that. Mm-hmm. Polyamory creates activates the same sexual drives that people cheating on each other does. Jealousy is activated, mate protection is activated, distracting attractions are activated. Mm-hmm. With polyamory, though, there's no betrayal, there's honesty, there's agreement. My wife and I were like that. Like, we never betrayed each other, but we, weren't exclusive for a number of years. And so if people can go through a period of time where they go, okay, I'm not exclusive and I'm exploring essentially different forms of relationships. Maybe you have same-sex or opposite-sex experiences. Maybe you have other kinds of sexual adventures. You go through those periods and then discover who you are. Most people, as they grow, discover that there's certain levels of intimacy and love that can only be maintained for them in an intimate, monogamous relationship. Some people, I'm sure, can maintain that in a relationship that involves being able to be sexual with other people. I really haven't encountered those people, so I see studies of polyamory people who say they're happy, which is fine. To me, great. You're in that stage, you're happy. My practical experience, personal experience, professional experience is that when people reach the end of that stage, they want to have a committed relationship, particularly when they start having children. That becomes more important to them.
Right.
Now, when we live in a culture that doesn't acknowledge and support couples' love affair with each other, the capacity to be attracted to someone and fall in love becomes awfully interesting if you don't feel like you have a fulfilling love affair with your partner. So now that's just one part of a complex thing.
Yeah. Also,
it's always nice to feel those little sparks of eroticism between you and other people. I mean, I like it if I get a message from a feminine person that she finds me appealing as a masculine person. And I know that the feminine people that I'm around, they don't want me to see them as a sexless form. Right. They want me to, if they're a feminine person, you're a feminine person, you want to feel that I see your feminine light and like it. Okay. That's enlivening. And so that's me being aware of those erotic polarities and managing them to serve the highest good. Now, when it comes to my actual love affair, I do not want to complicate that by running the risk of falling in love with another person. I mean, you can maintain those in love circuits on an episodic basis throughout the course of a relationship. Helen Fisher's research has shown that. Couples 20 years into a relationship, if they took care of their love affair, they got into the scanner, they showed them the picture of the partner, and by God, the same area is lit up of the people that have been in love for 9 months. Okay, there were a few of them. But that requires consciousness to maintain and enhance that love affair after the romantic infatuation period has passed. And not just consciousness, knowledge. And not just knowledge by description, but knowledge by acquaintance, knowledge that's been embodied. And so that's been my experience with polyamory. I think it's a great stage. And some people, I guess, can be in that mode. It seems to me that ultimately that limits a certain kind of intersubjectivity with the partner.
I would say I would guess. I mean, I don't know for sure, but I would imagine that it eliminates a certain level of depth in in a relationship. I could see, young people wanting, just with their curiosity and wanting to experience it. But I know one young couple who's planning to get married and still remain polyamory. And that raises a red flag for me. Are they going to be able to do that successfully? I doubt it. Is it okay to take a question at this point? My daughter's had her hand raised.
Oh, of course. And that was going to be my job to do that. I just forgot about it. So thank you, Gloria, so much. Okay, so please, I'd love to hear a question.
Okay, Kara, go ahead.
Hi, hello from France, where I'm listening in from. I was actually kind of shocked to hear you say that we're living in a time where there's more acceptance of diverse behaviors and diverse lifestyles than ever before in human history. And I'm wondering what you're resourcing when you say that, because everything I have read and continue to read about anthropology indicates very much the opposite, plus current events. I mean, we have more slavery, more, racism and warfare than probably ever before in human history. And I just can't see the correlation with that. So I was wondering if you could just clarify what you're referencing.
Sure. I don't know your data. The data that I've seen, the anthropological data and the social data and the poverty data and the violence data and the education data that I've seen, all say the opposite. There's less people.
Can you give any specific examples so that I can read what you're reading? Because as I said, I that completely doesn't. I mean, there's so much evidence to the contrary at this point.
What is your data, Kara?
Yeah. So tell me the evidence. Where are you getting? What's your source of this?
I mean, just even picking up. I mean, you've heard of Wade Davis, right? The leading anthropological author in the U.S. right now.
No.
I mean, just picking up one of his books, for example. I mean, if you study anything about the Iroquois Nation, if you study anything about the Polynesia, pre-his colonial Polynesia, there's just reference after reference on how many different peoples of different cultures and nations were interacting peacefully for over 1,000 years with no war, no slavery, no violence against women or children. Everybody was self-governed. That's what's inspired according to Howard Zinn, that's what inspired the American Revolution and the United States, the founding of the United States of America. So yeah, I'm just asking if you can give any sources that you're referencing.
No, that's good. God, somebody wrote a book recently. I forget his name. There was a popular book talking about things aren't as bad as they seem, and I can't think of it.
I know it was. It was a New York Times bestseller, and I have it. What was his name? I can't think of it now either. But the better angels of our
that one.
Angels, yeah.
Okay, I probably could Google it now. So first of all, to go back to what you were just saying, there is a lot of evidence before agriculture that people were relatively non-competitive, relatively collaborative. Right. The cities that were built 3,000 years ago, for instance, didn't have walls around them. Right. It suggests that they didn't feel threatened. When agriculture came and the period of empires came, there's just been a series of violent things that have been going forward, wars, empires, Genghis Khan, then divine rights of kings, and then the Enlightenment, and now we have the colonial period, which was devastating. And I could go on and on about that. So yeah, all that stuff happened. All that stuff took societies that were collaborative societies, Aborigines is a good example, and crushed them and did horrible things to them and tried to appropriate.
Well, it's important to note, though, that the Iroquois nation, which prevailed peacefully for 1,000 years and united many, many, many cultures of people throughout that time, were agricultural. So,
well, yeah,
there are some overlaps there in
that's
terms
true.
of, obviously we know that hunter-gatherer societies were primarily peaceful and collaborative, but there were instances where both could coexist. But I still haven't heard any of your resources or reference. What are your sources?
Okay, so I'm trying to remember. The first one is the book that I can't remember the name of the guy.
Better Angels of Our Nature by Steven Pinker.
Oh, that's the Pinker book.
Well, yeah, Pinker is absolutely of that mindset, but there are quite a few evolutionary biologists and anthropologists that are very prevalent and authoring many books currently that completely pivot and point out where he got all of that wrong. Very, very wrong.
I disagree.
That makes sense. If you're resourcing Pinker, then I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, I am, and also other things. For instance, it's no longer as acceptable in this world for one country to conquer another country. Okay, that's all that
happens, right? Even though it happens, and I'm thinking that just culturally, like there's still slavery, but it is illegal in most places.
That's right.
Yeah, but there's more of it than ever before. So we can say it's one thing to say that theoretically, people are more peaceful or more accepting, but the actual data is absolutely contrary to that.
Well, first of all, I don't disagree. I don't disagree with an awful lot of that. I think that there's an awful lot of people living in various forms of desperation, being controlled by other groups, whether they're corporations or whether they're organizations or whether there's other kinds of things. That's absolutely true. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, even if we just take the topic of suicide and depression, we have more of that than any other time in human history. And that correlates directly with feeling accepted by one's, community, right?
Yeah, I think that statistic, there's 8 times more suicide now than there was, 3 generations ago. And same way with depression. I think that there's another social trend that's reflecting in addition. And that is, I think that the old forms are disintegrating and the new forms haven't formed yet in terms of how are we going to get community back. The ways that community were being constructed 100 years ago don't work now. Churches don't work now, or people living in the same area for long periods of time. That kind of stuff doesn't work anymore.
Sure.
And also, I want to agree with you about the Iroquois. They were beginning to develop, the 5 nations were beginning to develop a more sophisticated form of government, a participatory government at that time when they were invaded by the colonialists. And
they had already developed it for 1,000 years, and they were 6 nations.
Well, okay.
They spanned from Canada to Mexico all the way along the eastern coast. It was a huge, huge nation of a confederate of United Nations.
Well, okay, so I'm not aware of that. My awareness of the way that it was working in the indigenous populations in that part of the country was that there was an awful lot of violence. You had a 1 in 8 chance of dying by violence if you were living in Indiana.
Unfortunately, that's been propagated by a number of authors, primarily white men who really got it wrong. But there's tons of literature, rewriting that history, thank goodness, that clarifies what is actually documented about indigenous people.
If you don't mind, send me these references. I mean, I'm really interested. Kara, I would be delighted to change my mind about this. Just send me your data, okay? And I'll check it out. And I'll get back to you about it.
Yeah, I would just start with a wonderful book by the evolutionary biologist Christopher Ryan, who also wrote Sex at Dawn, which is actually his better known book is Sex at Dawn, which is an entire book about polyamory and all its expressions.
I read Sex at Dawn.
Oh, okay. So
yes, I'm familiar with him. Check out his other book.
His latest book is Civilized to Death.
Oh,
yeah,
yeah. Civilized to Death is his. And
he takes on a lot of what Pinker published and wrote, and goes into great depth and resources many prevalent anthropologists and psychologists and evolutionary biologists as well.
Great. So, there's a good chance I'll get it. And I imagine some parts of my mind are going to be changed by some of this data. And I'll get back to you. If you email me, you can email me.
Yeah, I'd be happy to keep dialoguing for sure.
Yeah, do it. And I'll check it out. Okay. So anyway, sure. I'm open to being wrong about anything that I say.
Well, it depends on what you look at. I mean, one of the things that I always think of when people say, oh, things are getting progressively worse all the time, I think to myself, well, when I was raising my kids, I never took them to a hanging for entertainment. I mean, there are a lot of ways in which we have progressed. Child abuse is no longer legal and tolerated. It's, there are things that have gotten better. And I think we're going through, I agree with you, Keith, when you say that a lot of the chaos has to do with the transition that we're going through. I see it as kind of labor pains,
Mom, I just want to clarify just really quick on what you just said, that you're absolutely right in terms of relative, like on the child abuse thing and many other examples, that relative to previous colonial times,
yes,
things are getting better, but throughout human history is a very different thing.
Yes,
a very different angle.
I see that I'm sure there were cultures, non-colonial cultures, indigenous cultures where children were cherished and, that was not avoided. I'm sure of that. I'm talking about, our culture.
I mean, we're a blip in time compared to how long we've been on the planet. And the fact is that indigenous cultures don't even have words for violence against women and children because they don't exist in those cultures.
So so for you is if you want to embody that or take or use that data, is that somehow returning to some aspects of the indigenous experience, either in terms of family structure or group structure or government structure? Do you think
unfortunately, I mean, from what I see going, I mean, this is purely anecdotal. I can't answer that as a scholar, but I can't see that I think we have a very, very long way to go. I think the hippie movement in the 60s was maybe the first big wave toward returning to indigenous culture. Yeah. I mean, that was all about, getting in touch with nature and living in community and simplifying and
polyamory.
Polyamory. Yeah. I mean, I think modern day polyamory, if you read Sex at Dawn, modern day polyamory looks very different than all the expressions that it has had throughout most of the time we've been on the planet, throughout the world, in many contexts and expressions and purposes. But so modern day 1960s polyamory, where women were still had a long way to go for equal rights. You can't really have successful polyamory when half the population is disadvantaged, right?
You can on the local. You can on the local level, like on small levels. But
or on a big level, I would say.
Right, yeah, and but the big level, you're right, and this is one of the reasons.
You can. I thought you said you can't.
You can on the small level.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that your mom and I have this part of perspective of things improving is when I was a kid, my parents were progressive and they were racist and they were sexist. And around the world, Black people were still being lynched. And my grandfather used the N-word and other words frequently. My school was segregated. The first Black kid that came into my district had a cross burned on his. I mean, there was a lot of horrible, and I was living in Los Angeles. There's a lot of stuff that was normalized, horrible stuff. I could go on and on about what the government was doing to Tuskegee Airmen and Hiroshima. A lot of the stuff that was normalized during that time is not normalized now. The level of the culture is you can't do stuff like that. A lot of it happens, but it's not happening in the same way. And so what I've seen is there's been a rising tide around respect for humanity that isn't nearly where it should be, but it's a lot better than it was when I was a kid.
I admire your optimism and having many, many friends in the Black community throughout the US and other countries. I see the same fight being fought,
Of course, it's the same fight.
Yes, but it's I mean, there's still way too much racism and way
of course there is.
Supremacy.
Yeah.
But
I mean, baby steps perhaps.
It's also there's also much more I think there's much more in people's consciousness as a whole. Our government cannot be the barometer. I think that the government is never leading edge in terms of consciousness. I see it more as trailing edge, and so I think there's a much bigger movement than there has ever been, against racism in this country anyway. Today, especially since George Floyd, I think there's much more awareness in people's minds of racism. There has been in mine since that time, since George Floyd. I want to get back to relationships in the book, though.
Okay, so thank you, though, Kara. Thank you. This is
thank
good.
you.
This is lively. I'm looking forward to looking into your sources. So thank you. Thanks for your contribution.
Okay. Let's see. And I started that with the whole polyamory thing.
All right.
In chapter 17, you write, often the best way to intuitively know if another maintains their physical and psychological health is to be dedicated to maintaining our physical and psychological health. When we uncover blind spots in understanding ourselves, it often exposes our blind spots in understanding. So that's a direct quote from the book. And it seems to me that generally speaking, it's easier to see the blind spots or shadow in another than it is to see them in ourselves. Would you say?
Oh, yeah.
Right? So I guess the reverse is also true. When we uncover blind spots in other people, we can kind of see them in ourselves.
Well, yeah. Probably of those 65,000 therapy sessions, a third of them were couples. Okay. Mm-hmm. I think every single time, probably there's exceptions that I can't think of. When a couple comes in, he's convinced that things will be a lot better if she just changes certain things. And she's convinced everything will be better if he changes certain things. Mm-hmm. And they're both right, of course.
Right.
They can see destructive habits in the other person quite well. Mm-hmm. when a couple makes the transition, when there is a conflict, or when a defensive state arises, and defensive states are very specific human responses to perceived threat. When the reaction to that defensive state is, which causes us to want to focus on another person, to attack them, run away from them, blame them, that kind of stuff. If we develop a reflex of looking at ourselves in a defensive state, where am I distorted? Where am I blocking empathy and self-reflection? What destructive impulses do I have? Mm-hmm. It changes the dynamic of a couple. When one person does it, it disrupts the conflict patterns that couples have. Conflicts are very collaborative and cooperative activities. It literally takes two people cooperating to have a horrible argument. As soon as one person stops cooperating with it, it destabilizes that. When two people stop doing it, then other things happen. And what happens is they learn how to get back to love through conflict. And then that third foundation of intimacy is now not becoming more robust. And also, both of those people are developing on the integration of defenses line of development. And that integration of defenses line of development is a huge, big deal. If you have whatever psychological defense you have, to the extent that you're not aware of it and can't regulate it, it's going to screw you up. Mm. And it's going to screw up your relationships. And the closer your relationships are, the more intimate they are, the more important they are, the more those unresolved defenses or unaddressed defenses will screw those relationships up. If we're aware of them, if we address them, if we acknowledge them, act on them, and so on, we grow. And we're become a value-added presence in our intimate relationships, or in other relationships too, for that matter. Radical self-awareness is also radically aware of our impact on other people. Human beings are exquisitely sensitive to other people. Mm-hmm. If I walk down the street and I have screw you expression on my face and screw you attitude, I'm spreading little waves of screw you attitude along the boulevard. If I walk down the boulevard saying, life is beautiful and you're beautiful, I'm sending little waves of life is beautiful, you're beautiful. That has an impact. And I have a responsibility to know that and to take a stand for the latter rather than the former. It's a big deal. And so that's true around couples especially, and it's true in families especially. And the worst thing in a family or in a couple is to normalize people treating each other with emotional or physical violence. But even emotional violence, contempt is a form of emotional violence. Dismissal is a form of emotional violence. That degrades consciousness. Mm-hmm. That tends to threaten the other person's unconscious, which will develop and elaborate defensive reactions to that in self-protection, because we want to feel secure. And it's particularly a big deal in the family because these days, the nuclear family is where the tribal feeling is. And that sense of I have to get along or I'm going to be excluded from the tribe really creates powerful defensive reactions.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Would you describe the difference between vertical and horizontal health? I like that part.
I got, that's an adaptation of one of the principles of integral psychology. Mm. Integral psychology says that horizontal health is maintaining harmony with all the understandings of what harmony is within your current worldview. Mm-hmm. And so if I live in a fundamentalist community, then part of maintaining horizontal health is maintaining the ceremonies and the positions and the attitudes that cause me to be in harmony with the people around me, which say that's Christianity is the one way. You know, I need to believe that.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't believe that, that's a healthy thing to believe in that environment. Because if I don't, I tend to get pushback, excluded. If you're in a triathlete community, health is maintaining your capacity to do triathlons. Okay. If you grow, whatever your worldview is, there's points where those beliefs don't quite fit the universe that we exist in. There actually are more than one way, in my opinion, to be one with God. Actually, it's very dangerous to be a triathlete physically, and that if you want physical health, there are other ways of being that leave you literally a healthier human being physically. There's other understandings, particularly when you go from conformist to rational, where you're moving into world centricism, where I don't just want things that are good for Americans. I want things that are good for all human beings. That's vertical health. That's where I push against the existing worldview, and there's a better way. I can find it. It's there somewhere. And here it comes. And as that happens, your sense of self, your sense of health, your sense of the world changes. Mm-hmm. Usually it becomes wider, more expansive. It brings in other elements. And that's the difference between horizontal and vertical health. Both of them, of course, are important.
Yeah.
But as seekers, we really have that little thing of going that next step. That next step always has a certain amount of magic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have I guess a different reference.
Sure.
I liked what you said about that, and I totally agree. And when you used vertical and horizontal, it reminded me of something that I have thought quite a bit about, which is vertical versus horizontal growth. That growth can happen on both levels. And the way that I distinguish those two is horizontal growth is, growth in terms of service to the community and, relationship. And vertical growth is more an individual kind of inner growth. Okay. Where and I came up with a graphic a few years ago for Caritas, which was a horizontal line depicting horizontal growth and vertical line depicting vertical growth, and then a circle in the middle where the two come together, which is like, a community, right? Where you have both individual growth and communal growth, right? I
like that.
Yeah.
I like it a lot. And also it kind of reflects something that, I'm sorry, Kara's not still online.
Yeah, she had to leave for some reason.
That historically, particularly in spiritual communities, it's less likely that your own personal awakening is viewed as significant and as important as whatever the logos is, the dogma is of that current community. Right. And more, I'm seeing people having their individual realizations tend to be supported by other people without a need to sign on to any particular dogma other than unity. Guru yoga is not that popular as far as I can tell in the United States now. It was a lot more popular back in the 60s and 70s. Mm-hmm. And Guru yoga has its particular hazards associated with it. So I like the cross and the circle around that. And I've been seeing that happening, and I like it a lot. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the problems was reflected by something that Kara was saying. And Vivek Murthy, Obama's current Surgeon General, also, he said it. Social isolation is the biggest health problem in the United States, because where are the spiritual communities where we come together and do ceremony with each other on a regular basis?
Right.
Where are the communities where we're, kind of interacting and supporting each other and helping each other? How are they being formed? That's just not happening in ways that are working for people emotionally and psychologically and physically. And so that's just a need. It's a hunger that you can feel in the collective that is emerging. And I don't know what the answers will be, other than in the pandemic, a lot of people are going out in the suburbs or going out in the country to live and work remotely. The people that I've known have done it, they've gone, well, I've met my neighbors next door, and I'm hoping that there'll be new forms of, say, community or tribe or and so on that will arise, that will be easier to recapitulate, easier to participate in, so people don't have that social isolation.
Yeah, I think that's so important. You have to have both. And when some of the Eastern traditions came to the United States in the 60s and 70s, we left out. It was like a selective kind of, adaptation, where we left out the compassionate service for all sentient beings, And
Mahayana Buddhism.
And it became this individual kind of practice. Don't bother me. I'm meditating.
Right.
And I mean, of course, I meditate and I do it alone most of the time. I love group meditations, but most of the time I meditate as a practice in the morning. But so I have nothing against solo meditation, but it's there's got to be both. There's got to be a sense of community and service, as well as the individual growth.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
My wife Becky and I have been. This is a lively area of interest of us for decades. She's gone and interviewed people in deliberate, intentional communities. We've looked at the literature on it. Again, you just can feel the hunger for that. And I really agree with the part about service. There's a study on friendships. It said one of the ways you maintain friendships is you give and receive favors. You take care of each other actively.
Right.
And I think in communities, we don't feel connected unless we're doing things for each other. We're serving each other.
Right. We're social animals.
We are social animals.
Would you talk a little bit about trauma and how it affects physical and psychological health, as well as relationships?
Yeah. There's a lot to be said about it. Specifically, we have a bias towards learning from painful and negative experiences. It's the human negativity bias, and it's obvious why, from an evolutionary standpoint, we have that. I mean, all you got to do is step on one wrong snake and you're dead. Okay, so avoiding the snake becomes more important than smelling all the great flowers. You don't want to be so distracted smelling the flowers you don't step on a snake. And so when we have an experience, a negative experience, our unconscious will take that in and make us a little bit more cautious, a little bit more scared, a little bit more worried in that particular area. If it's a repetitive area, it can create a habitual response of pessimism or of self-castigate, self-criticism, all the defenses, essentially. And if it's a big trauma, big T trauma, as Francine Shapiro calls it, there can be one big event like an assault or an accident or a war event that can cause PTSD, but which is much more common, is that we'll have sensitivities and we'll have distress that's associated with learning that we've done previously that's made it to our implicit memory and so on. And what is generally not known in the trauma field, what happens is people will develop a treatment system and then say this treatment system is very effective around trauma. Peter Levine's somatic experiencing, for instance, Francine Shapiro, brain spotting.
Belarus Neprostek.
Excuse me?
Belarus Neprostek.
Yeah, okay, lots of stuff, okay? But really when you're addressing trauma, it goes through, there's 4 stages that people cycle through. And it depends on what stage you're in, how you address the trauma. For instance, in the first stage, you need to recognize that there's a problem. And that problem is associated with some kind of learning, whether it's learning from traumatic events or childhood experiences or something. And so it's very important to be able to normalize that experience and those memories and to feel it or remember it in effectively tolerable doses. So that's an important stage. But then the stage after that is we want to fit that experience into a narrative of our life that's a positive narrative. Our right hemispheres has autobiographical narratives of our lives, and we want to understand, because every time you bring up a traumatic memory, you're reconsolidating that memory, and you want those memories to be coherent, to fit with, I'm making decisions to go forward. That makes traumatic events in the past less traumatizing and more part of a journey, the hero's journey that we're taking. But then at a particular point, you just have habits of reacting. You might have a habit of self-criticism or a habit of depression or a habit of anxiety. And then some of the modern cognitive behavioral techniques of exposure and response prevention and turning your consciousness from a negative to a positive, developing a new habit of consciousness, that becomes then the focus. And you can see the focus of the first stage, paying attention to the event, feeling the feelings, and being able to remember it, is not the same as, oh, that's beginning again. I need to put my attention on something else that is a more positive thing. It depends on what stage of working with trauma you're in.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the 4th stage is as we go through our lives, we'll have little intrusions where we're just not fully present. Well, how come I'm not fully present? Where's that coming from? And we go back to stage 1, 2, or 3 again. And so working with trauma is basically working with the evolution of our individual consciousness. And it's managing a series of processes that never really stop. But we get more of a sense of mastery and more of a sense of confidence over addressing it. And as we do that, we can shift from experiencing ourselves as, say, a traumatized person or a depressed person to being someone who's a happy person who has ups and downs and who is successfully navigating their ontological evolution. And then when you're in a relationship, you're either helping each other with that or you're not. Couples that enact defensive patterns with each other and don't address them are amplifying traumatic programming. Couples that learn how to catch their defensive states and regulate them and get back to love, they're supporting and accelerating their individual development through traumatic programming. And this is the incredible power of intimacy. If someone feels really bad, they will feel almost immediately better if they begin to share it with a caring other. Okay? Well, with couples, my job is to be that caring other and to help my partner be that caring other. That's my job. As I do that, both of those things support my own and their working through traumatic programming.
Right. Would you say that the small t trauma is more insidious and because it's less, we have less awareness around it?
According to Francine Shapiro, she's seen way more symptoms coming from small T traumatic programming, the big T traumatic programming, the PTSD is relatively rare. That mostly 80% of the time when a human has a traumatic event, on the other side, they become more resilient. I mean, the exception to that is war.
Yeah.
No coincidence. If we're around an environment where other self-aware people are trying to kill us or we're trying to kill them, that just degrades people's consciousness, that degrades their frontal lobes. I mean, it's a horrible thing for human beings.
Yeah.
But other kinds of traumas, 80% of the time, there's post-traumatic growth. 20% of the time, there's not. Okay? But we're biased to grow. We're biased to get wiser. That's the bias. That's what the brain wants to do. That's what the human spirit wants to do. We want to do it, and we want to do it with other like-minded people. You know, Buddha, the 3 jewels of Buddhism, Sangha was one of them. I want to be around like-minded people who love me for who I am, not in spite of who I am.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, also, what you do immediately after, the immediate reaction, I guess, you know, because like animals, when they have some kind of trauma, they know how to get those hormones out of their bodies.
Yeah.
They jump up and down, or they shake all over, or they race around, or they tremble. I remember when I almost drowned at the age of 10.
Oh, no.
In Copacabana Beach in Brazil. And when I got out of the water, well, I had what one near-death person told me, who's done a lot of research, Melvin Morse, on children's near-death experience. He said, this was near-death experience. And I said, but I didn't die. And he said, no, but you came close. And I got as close as I couldn't hold my breath anymore. And
Wow.
So I let it out, right? And I knew I couldn't take another breath. And at that point, I relaxed, and I felt this overwhelming sense of peace, like it was okay. I knew I was going to die, and it was absolutely okay, you know, because I knew it was like falling into the hands of God or something, you know. It was this knowing that all would be well. And with that, I relaxed, and I kind of must have floated.
You started floating.
Suddenly, I opened my eyes, and I could see the top of the water, and then I got out, right?
Oh, good.
And so when I got out, and I went to join my adult cousins with whom I had come to the beach, I didn't want to I couldn't tell them what had happened, because they would never let me back in the water. And so I sat in my towel and I just shook like crazy. And I thought, but that's okay, because they just think I'm cold because I just got out of the water, right? So I allowed myself to shake. And out of that, many years later, when I was doing some mythological work, personal myths kind of thing, I realized that I had developed a myth out of that experience that I had never really put together, but I realized it then. And the myth was that when things are really chaotic, you just have to let go. You know, when things are out of your control, totally out of your control, you just have to let go, and it'll be okay. You know, don't keep trying to make it happen. So
that's pretty great.
That's
a pretty great meaning to take out of that experience.
Yeah. And the other thing I thought of was, I'll never be afraid of drowning because it's so peaceful. It was really funny. But yeah, so I think that the fact that I let myself shake like that really prevented PTSD. Right?
Yeah, you know, Sapolsky's book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, you know, that's his favorite story. You know, the zebra has a close encounter with a lion, it goes off and shakes and move on. Now, the problem with that, of course, is that we're human beings. A zebra can project, I don't know, a couple of minutes into the future. Okay? You and I can project to the end of time and the beginning of time. Right. So often what we need to do is exactly what you did. We need to we need to inhabit a story where we viscerally experience the event as making us stronger and wiser.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow, when that happens, there's a resolution. And it is a mythological process. And we are the myth-making species. Mm-hmm. We create stories every moment. Our unconscious is sending us stories constantly.
Yeah.
And there are little stories and big stories. And the big stories are the myths that we live our lives by.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sometimes they outlive their usefulness. Mm-hmm. And other times they're worth keeping.
Well, yeah, they're always evolving.
Yeah.
I mean, that's going back to vertical health or vertical development. You know, the vertical part of the way that you know that you're evolving your consciousness is that the myths of your life shift. The ones that have luminance shift. For instance, with men, it's very much from acolyte to warrior to man of wisdom. Though sometimes it can be from apprentice to artist to man of wisdom or woman of wisdom. Women can go through this. Women, of course, go through the same thing. And the archetype that you inhabit as a man of wisdom is different than the archetype that you inhabit as a warrior. Mm-hmm. Why? There's different things that are attractive and important and significant. The warrior stuff is still there, but it's been included and transcended in a different sense of self, in a different story to a certain extent. And I think that, again, that's part of how we can kind of observe our own growth. What are the myths that have more or less luminance for us? What are the new ones that have more luminance as we progress?
Yeah. I was part of a group one time, small group of friends, and we were reading the book, The Mythic Path by Stanley Krippner and David Feinstein. Mm-hmm. That takes you through, that's when I realized I had developed that myth. It takes you through, your childhood and what myths you developed, and nice. This one member of our group, she had a very difficult childhood. She had polio and her parents were both alcoholics, and she would often be the buffer that her mother would use, between she and her father. And so when things got really, really crazy and hard, she developed this practice this myth that said, I can be happy anyway. And she would just go off by herself and she would make herself think of something that made her happy, right? And then she would just focus on that. So it was a real survival mechanism, that she developed. But when we were doing the book, she realized that that myth, although it got her through a very difficult childhood, had in some ways outlived its usefulness, because when she and her husband would have a conflict, she would go off and think, I can be happy anyway, instead of trying to resolve the conflict, right? And so she realized that myth needed replacing, and she replaced it with a better one.
Well, that's true for all the defenses.
Yeah.
All the defenses were originally solutions to problems. Okay. Right. And there were solutions that were developed by immature consciousness, immature brains, mm-hmm. that were more concrete, operational, mm-hmm. More absolutist, more visceral. Mm-hmm. And so those solutions, eventually we have access to better solutions, mm-hmm. as she did. Yes. She can still go off and think about positive things, but now she can add on to that. I can stick with my husband and get back to love.
Right.
Oh, okay. Now this now is an enhanced version of this old solution.
Yes. Yeah, that's great. We have a few more minutes. I want to ask Jane if she might have any questions at this point.
Sure.
Well, one question I had was you did say that some people have like less strong reactions to emotions and other people have stronger reactions to emotions. What causes that?
Part of it, 40 to 60% of most temperamental traits are heritable. Now, that means 40 to 60% of them come from other experiences. But so part of it is heritability. For instance, I have OCD in my genome. My mother was OCD when she was a kid. My daughter was OCD. I was OCD. So we had a vulnerability to have high anxiety and obsessive thinking. So what does that mean? That means developmentally, we had to put more energy into learning how to regulate that than somebody who wasn't wired that way. I've worked with people that by nature had mellow temperaments from the very beginning. Okay. And if you ask them, I have that with my older brother. My older brother was kind of a crabby baby. I was a really happy baby. So I got a lot better attention from my mom, she was like 24 or 25. What does she know? I mean, you give a happy baby better attention than you give a crabby baby. And when my brother was 17 or 18 months, he really got sick of it, got a claw hammer and climbed into my crib, was about ready to kill me. And my parents found it, stopped him. Now, this is a reflection of my family. My family was kind of a wolf family. Whenever that story is told, everybody laughs. They think it's the cutest thing ever that Gary tried to kill Keith with. So there's we are temperamentally, some of us are more emotionally reactive. Some of us are less emotionally reactive. Now, what that leaves us with is a goodness of fit. If a high emotionally reactive kid happens to have a parent that has an avoidant attachment figure, kind of a suck it up and carry on attachment style, that's not a good fit. That kid will constantly be getting the message, you're not good enough. You're screwed up. Okay. If in modern parenting, that parent, even if they have avoidant tendencies, would go talk to somebody like me, and they go, okay, I need to be able to learn how to adjust and help my child learn how to do affect regulation. Take a deep breath, go walk outside, and normalize the fact that some things are going to bother you more than they bother your sister, say, or your brother. And as we discover what type of person we are, then we realize some aspects of us don't require a lot of attention. Some require more. If you're genetically programmed to be active, a lot of boys are like that. Testosterone makes you active. Makes it more difficult to sit still in school and do it at school. And if there isn't an adjustment for that, I have a friend who got a teaching credential. When she had a kid like that, a boy like that, when he got too antsy, she says, I want you to go run around the school and come back. Let's see if you can do it in 3 minutes. Okay. Get go up and around the school and come back.
That's perfect.
Okay. And then he would go, so what's 10 plus 10? Like that. Okay. So this is another thing about modernity that I think is a better thing. I wish Kara was here to have that conversation.
I don't know why she
the standard with children much more now is we need to adjust the learning style to what type of person the kid is. And we assume that kids aren't all the same type of person. Boys and girls aren't the same. Kids actually learn more when they're in same-sex classes at certain ages, and then that shifts when they get older. Okay, so that's what the research shows us. That hasn't been implemented widely in education, but that's what the data says right now. So we just keep on learning, and part of that is some of us have more trouble with certain emotions, some of us have less trouble. And if that's the case, then part of our developmental task is getting better at the areas and that we're difficult with, and acknowledge our strengths in the areas. I'll tell somebody, you have a great temperament. I'll bet you've always had it. They said, nobody's ever told me that. I thought, well, that's a natural strength of yours. Feel a certain sense of satisfaction of having that natural strength. So that's kind of how that works.
I also really enjoyed your description of like when you're in love or something along the lines of that.
Oh, yeah, romantic infatuation.
Get OCD about like the person.
Oh, yeah.
I have no OCD in my life, like my work or my like space, but I definitely get OCD like as soon as I start
Of
dating.
course you do. And we're meant to. We're meant to do it, to just have sex all the time, be totally into each other and get pregnant and have a kid, and then bond with that and fall in love with that child. Both in a pair bond, the guy, humans, not like a lot of, some mammals don't do this, humans do. The guy is programmed to fall in love with the child too. Men's testosterone goes down 25% right before the birth, and their estrogen goes down 25%. They're getting wired to fall in love with that child and be essentially more maternal with that child. And, and couples that do that and take care of their friendship and their love affair through the first year do way better 3 years later. Couples that don't take care of their friendship and their love affair are doing worse 3 years later. And that's a big deal.
The first year after the birth.
Yeah. Because, I mean, childbirth is one of the 5 things about being a woman that I don't envy. I envy quite a lot about being a woman, but there's 5 things I don't, and childbirth is one of them.
I'm curious about the other 4.
Having periods, being smaller than men, okay, being biologically determined to tend and befriend, so it makes it a little bit more difficult to be aware of my needs and to assert my needs. And also that generally, if a family screws up, the woman is left holding the bag with kids. Okay, the most poverty-stricken segment of the population in this country are single mothers in their 30s. So I don't envy those 5 things.
Right.
But all the rest of the stuff, all the great outfits, being able to be the feminine person in eroticism.
And the girlfriends. That's the best part.
Girlfriends, being able to do your hair any way that you want, jewelry. I go to a party. I want to hang out and talk with the women more than the guys. No offense, guys. So anyway, I like all that stuff.
I just noticed a chat note from Kara that I hadn't noticed. And when she had to leave, she said, "Thank you for the talk and discussion. I regretfully have to sign off because I am sitting down to dinner at someone else's home. Happy to be in touch for further discourse."
Oh, thank you, Kara.
So that's why she had to sign off. I was very surprised when she left, but now I know why.
Yeah, I understand.
Anything else, Jane, on your mind?
Yeah.
No,
it was just a beautiful talk, and I'm gonna get your book. I think those 5 questions were very succinct. Like you could easily be going. My thing with dating is sometimes I have trouble kind of like recognizing red flags. A friend of mine told me a red flag in the shape of a heart is still a red flag.
I'm going to quote that. It's a good quote.
So, and like I want to be a nice person, and so then maybe I'll be. I have trouble with kind of seeing things. I get my eyes fill up with too much love, and I'm not seeing clearly. So I think those questions they can be very good guideposts for me, because just even thinking about, and they're also very gentle. Like they're not overly critical, they're not overly they are kind of reasonable and give a lot of room for making it work. But if you can't make this question work, then you're not going to really be able to you have to check all 5 boxes. And so anyways, I really liked it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and they're conversations to have.
Yeah, right.
Asking that question and bringing it up with a partner creates a conversation. And when you're in love, you unconsciously avoid the difficult conversations. And so that's when you really need to have them. John Gottman and Julie Gottman with somebody else, another couple I can't remember, they wrote a book called 8 Conversations, which is kind of like that. They suggested that in your first 10 dates, you have eight of them. And it's similar. Talk about commitment, talk about sexuality, talk about money, talk about parenting. This is their way of getting at the material. I like asking myself those questions about other people and about myself, because I want to encourage that dialogue, that connection between the unconscious and the conscious. So,
what was the name of that book? 8. What was it?
8 Conversations.
Conversations. Cool.
Yeah.
And in
Or 8 days. No, it's called 8 dates. It's called 8 dates.
In Keith's book, he has exercises for everything he says practically. There are exercises that you can do on your own and with your partner, and they're excellent. Very, very step by step, very, very simple.
That's good. I'm one of those geeks that actually do the exercises in books.
Great. Buy my books. Buy my books to do the exercises.
I will. Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's talk in just this last few minutes, and I had hoped to actually devote a little more time to it, but let's talk about post-issue relationships and the repair process specifically.
So let's start with the repair process.
Yeah.
When there's an injury or a wound in a relationship, you feel it. And at that particular point, you're disconnected in the way that you want to be connected. And so you want to repair that rupture, and you want to do it as quickly as possible. Time matters. So how do you do it? Well, if each person feels understood and validated, and you both feel like you took a step forward on the issue, and then you feel warmly about each other, that's a repair. So you feel understood and validated. At least I can see how you feel that. I feel understood and validated. I can see how you could think that and feel that. Here's this step we're going to take forward to move forward on this issue. Okay. And we both feel warm towards each other. There's that, that warmth back. That's a repair. That's necessary. Couples need to get good at it. We're not taught how to do it particularly well. And it's very difficult to do when we're in a defensive state. And so it's a skill that we can learn, and we practice with another person, and they make it either easier or harder to do that. And if they have a growth mindset, they'll get better at it, which is why growth mindsets are a big deal. Mm-hmm. Now, what's a post-issue relationship? A post-issue moment is when you're with a person and anger or distress arises, and your natural reaction is just to move into repair. Mm-hmm. You're not wasting time with, you did this, you did whatever. It's like, bam. Mm-hmm. I'm going to get back to warmth by understanding, validating. I know you're going to do it with me. We'll figure a step forward, and then we'll feel great about each other again. Doesn't matter what the issue is. Doesn't matter how bad I feel, how bad you feel. That's where we're going to be. And that's where we live. Mm-hmm. Now, that doesn't mean issues don't arise. Issues arise.
And it's not a denial of the problem or the issue. Never. It's never a denial.
It's never a denial of the problem, the issue, but it's always a reflexive understanding. When I get into a defensive state, I have distorted perspectives about you. I don't trust those. I know you are. You're great. So, my wife will say sometimes, "Are you mad at me?" And I go, "Yeah, but that if I'm mad at you, that's my problem. It's not your problem. You're great. You might be great and I might be mad at you, but that's my problem. I can work through it. And I know you're available to help me not be mad." Mm-hmm. So that's a post-issue moment with each other. And when you have a relationship that's characterized by that form of relating, that's a post-issue relationship. And the reason that it's significant for helpers and healers and therapists and coaches and stuff is that we're guides. And so when you're a guide, it's useful to know what the end point, where you're guiding people towards. It's not, development is not random. Personal evolution is not random. All the developmental lines converge. They converge towards more of a sense of unity, more world centricism, more self-awareness, more compassion, deeper consciousness. Okay? And so you're guiding people towards that. Mm-hmm. And when they have little moments of that, you go, that was a little moment. That repair really worked. Or they go, "Yo, we agree now." I go, "Yeah, but you're not done." "What do you mean?" "Well, look at each other. Do you feel warm?" "No." "Well, you're not there yet." Mm-hmm. They look at each other. They feel warm. Okay, got the last piece. And so that's the significance of post-issue relationships. It's a guide, and that's a guide for all therapists, really. When someone comes into my office or when I'm doing a group, my vision is of them functioning basically in a second tier fashion consistently. I have an image of that starting within about 2 or 3 minutes, probably within seconds of meeting somebody. And I'm always guiding them in that direction. Now, wherever they are isn't there, or they wouldn't be coming to me, maybe in a class, but rarely in therapy. So wherever they are, okay, what's the next step? But the next step is going in that direction. And you just keep on doing that.
And the more you succeed, the more it reinforces itself, right? And the more you realize how good it feels and how it's, doable and very positive.
And also how good you are and how powerful you are. We as humans do not really get how extraordinarily great we are and powerful. And it's important to be aware of that, because if we're not aware of it, we run the risk of using that power to cause damage, which as a whole we have, of course. I mean, I won't make a list of all the things the humanists are doing wrong, but it's a big list.
Yeah.
But we also have that power. Most of us do our best to do right most of the time. That's pretty great. That's a pretty great thing.
Yeah. And it's also important to know that whatever kind of relationship it might be, there might be one person who is at a post-issue level of consciousness and ability and capable of doing that, and the other person is not, and it can still work. It can still, it can still be done. You give in your interview with Jeff Salzman, you gave an example of a man with his father and his mother.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Let's hear that.
Well, it's, I literally don't remember that example, but.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was a man whose father was very difficult. And,
oh, yeah.
Okay, you go ahead.
All right. So if you're in a post-issue moment, then you're going to notice whether somebody can collaborate with you on a repair or not. If they can't, what you do is you shift from relating to them to handling them. You go, okay, we're not going to, if I just try to engage you at the level that you're engaging, Keith's wrong, I'm right, then it's just going to escalate. So I'm going to handle you. I'm going to try to do it in an ethical way. What's valid about where you're coming from? This is where I can sign on to it. I disagree about the other stuff, but I really don't want to discuss that. So I did some validation. I set a boundary. I forgive them for the implicit messages of contempt for me, for my position or whatever it is. Recognize that's coming from their defensive states. And then what happens is they calm down as they feel the counterattack not coming. They feel me loving them and me validating the part of what they're saying that is true. Okay. And now that's not as satisfying for me as if we're engaged in a real dialectic. But, it's the best I can do in that situation. And the principle here is generally the person with the deepest consciousness in a moment has the most responsibility to make that a good moment. And that's how you work.
And that same man had a mother who was the perfect mother. And he had issues with her that he couldn't get post-issue about. That, you talked about, that she was much, I got the impression that she was much more, a much easier person to get along with, essentially. More mature, had been the perfect mother, but somehow he was always looking for her approval.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
That's right. Okay, I'm remembering. I just got it. I just did the little clickety click of the download. That's exactly right. And so he was wired from childhood, never enough, never enough, never enough, never enough, never enough. And so he kept fighting himself around her, just continuing wanting to do more. And unfortunately, because of that, she felt entitled unconsciously to him always wanting to do more. Okay? So with her, he needed to set a boundary and say, no, I'm not going to do more. she would resist. Well, you've always done more in the past. No, I'm not going to do more this time. And he had to tolerate that distress to be able to grow in that relationship.
Mm-hmm. Where with the more difficult parent, he knew just what to do.
Yeah, set the boundary.
Yeah.
And that was easier.
Yeah.
But when he was just feeling that, oh, if I just go a little farther, you'll understand me perfectly. No, never going to get understood perfectly.
Right.
So the boundary was an interior boundary for self.
Yeah.
I'm going to do this, whatever feels right to me, and then stop and then deal with the tension that happens. Accept it. And then radical acceptance gradually decreases that tension over time.
Yeah. So in the last few chapters, you talk about the different types of hierarchies, and we don't have time to get into it, but one of the things, the dominator hierarchy versus the
growth hierarchy.
And one thing that occurred to me as I was reading that is that the dominator hierarchy is based in fear, and the growth hierarchy is based in love.
Yeah, well, that's partially true. Okay. Generally, in the dominator hierarchy, the person who's dominating, they're wanting love, but they unconsciously think they can get it by pushing other people around or dominating another person, and they can't. And the frustration of that becomes a loop that creates more domination, and so on and so on. I'll feel better when I have more money, or when I have more power, or when I have, I don't feel better yet, so I need more money, more power, more domination.
Right. Which is fear-based.
Excuse me?
Which is fear-based thinking. It's
fear-based thinking. It's scarcity thinking. It's fear-based thinking. Mm-hmm. But the motivation is I want to feel good. Okay? Always. Right. And so growth hierarchy is love-based.
Yeah.
I want us both to grow, and that's what pleases me.
Yeah.
And, we are human beings. We create hierarchies. Our relationships are hierarchical. Our cultures are hierarchical. And so what we want to have is good, growth hierarchies. We want loving hierarchies. And if there's dominator hierarchy, which we have a tendency to create, all institutions have this tendency towards corruption, towards growth, towards dominator hierarchies. We just need a self-reflective loop to be deconstructing that on an ongoing basis in relationships and in institutions.
Yeah.
And it's nature of institutions to co-opt those anti-corruption elements, like a federal agency being colonized essentially by a big corporation. It's a good example.
Yeah. Well, I find it important to and necessary to define growth hierarchy for a lot of people, because the postmodern level it is has this aversion to hierarchies.
That's right.
Period. Right? They can't accept any kind of hierarchy, and so I always find myself in a position to say, but you're talking about dominator hierarchies. And so I think it's really important with this, prevalence of green to illustrate what a healthy hierarchy and a natural hierarchy looks
Absolutely.
like.
And how to maintain it.
Yeah.
And there's lots of data about it. There's lots of research on it, which is pretty beautiful.
That's great. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, this has been very stimulating. Yes, Jane.
I just want to know, what's the first book of yours that you recommend reading? Like the is the first one, the newest one you'd recommend?
Yeah, I'd suggest Loving Completely and Shadow Light as the first two. But I got to say, I got 8 books and 2 kids, and it's hard to say if I have a favorite,
Right, yeah.
I like all my books.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I can vouch.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Keith, for your time and your expertise and your delightful conversation.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, you guys. And, have a wonderful weekend and have a great Thanksgiving.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye.